Last week, I got invited to playtest a brand new game, which is called Spectre Divide. It's a game that's being produced by a brand new development studio that goes by Mountaintop Studios. And what I think more people are going to care about is that they have a crazy list of investors, including Tarek, It's Timmy, Sacriel, Zed, Co-Carnage, and Shroud. On top of being an investor, Shroud is also a gameplay consultant for Mountaintop. So he's worked with the development team directly to tailor the game into something most players are going to enjoy. And based on the introduction that Mountaintop and Shroud gave us to their game, I would say they've put in a lot of hours together. I was invited to playtest the game, and that was it. I'm not being paid to make this video on the game. I have not been paid to give any positive feedback or reviews. So in this video, I wanted to go through and give my honest impressions on the game, and as somebody who finds any reason to hate on games whatsoever,
Nicola is mine and mine alone.
This game is terrible, bro. I thought Spectre Divide was extremely good. At this point, you're probably wondering what the game even is, and very simply, Spectre Divide is a 3v3 tactical shooter. Sounds simple, but it's not, because each game you play is actually also a 6v6. Mountaintop created a very unique system which they are calling Duality, where you control two bodies with one mind. During the round, you can constantly swap basically your consciousness between the two characters, which are your specters. I'll go into more detail on the system later, but think of it as having two lives, but also much more than that. This clip gives a really cool demonstration of Duality, where you can see me poop on Rakakis because I killed his teammate, which gave up my position, and then I was able to get a trade on myself dying to win the round, which is what the entire system is about. It's not really just to give you another life, but to also drastically raise the skill ceiling in this genre. Compared to other tactical shooters like CS and Valorant, Spectre Divide's gunplay is also very different. In most of the gameplay, you're going to see me ADS because that gives full moving accuracy. Hip firing still tends to work like other tactical shooters where moving is going to inflict aim penalties, and the guns do still have unique spray patterns to memorize, but overall this is going to feel and play very differently to a game like Valorant. Lastly, when it comes to utility, Spectre is revolving around what they are calling sponsors. The best comparison to this is like picking your class in most games, where selecting a sponsor gives you access to 3 unique abilities. For example, the Pinnacle International sponsor gives you a Splinter Grenade to damage enemies, an Adrenalink to heal yourself over time, and a Flash Grenade to obviously blind players. So depending on the sponsor you pick for that game, those are the only pieces of utility that you're going to have access to. Other than that, the game mode you're playing is a basic bomb defusal scenario where one team attacks a site and another team defends a bomb site. In the playtest, we were doing casual, so that was the best of 14 rounds where you could tie the game 7-7. I would imagine in competitive modes, overtime will exist. That is basically everything you need to know about the game, so now I wanted to go in depth with each section and go over what I think the pros and the cons are. By far, the most unique system in this game, and the one that I think people will naturally have the most questions about, is Duality. When I heard that this was a tactical shooter that you also needed to micromanage moving 2 players around the arena, the first thing I thought is that it would be an absolute headache. Like, yeah, sure, there would be some cool ways to outplay someone, but it would be much more of a chore than actually being fun, and I was wrong. First off, at any point, you can throw down your other Spectre with a single key press while you're playing the game using what they call the puck. The inactive Spectre will just sit there crouched until you swap to them, which can also be done at any point. And there's also unique places that you can get to using your second Spectre. Certain catwalks or air ducts might not have an access ramp, so you need to throw your Spectre up there and then swap to them to gain access. The same thing goes for getting site control. Certain sites have walls that you can't directly walk through, but you can throw your Spectre over them or even between the rungs of bars. During prep phase, one of the coolest things is that you can use left and right click to also instantly teleport your Spectres across the map so you can set up quickly. I was really worried that prep phases would be a nightmare, requiring you to move both Spectres into positions before the round started. It's not, it is super simple. After the round officially begins, when you relocate your Spectre, it is going to take time to travel to a different position. The time it takes is going to be determined by the distance the Spectre needs to travel. If the inactive Spectre is currently on the opposite side of the map and you call it to your current position, it's going to take a little bit to travel over before you can swap to the Spectre again. This is primarily to keep things balanced, and it's great because it prevents you from just throwing your Spectre behind people, instantly swapping, and then shooting them in the back. When traveling, Spectres are also going to show an electric trail on the ground, so that's a key piece of information to play off of. You're also able to bring your currently equipped weapon with you when swapping Spectres, which is going to be amazing for eco rounds, so you could end up using a single weapon across both Spectres. Spectres that are not currently active are also going to provide you with alerts and information that is extremely useful. Whenever they hear footsteps that are far away, they'll provide you with a Spectre warning indication, and then if the footsteps are nearby, it'll say Spectre danger. No alerts are provided if somebody is walking, but this can give a ton of information about where players might be. Overall, when it comes to the duality system, whether you agree that it's cool for a game like this or not, it is borderline designed perfectly. I say that as a pessimist who will call something out for any flaw, but right now I would give this a 10 out of 10 rating. I think it is perfect. I'm shocked they got it this well, because to me, it seems like it would just be a nightmare to get right, but they crushed it. Second, and obviously the most important when it comes to a tactical shooter like this, is obviously the gunplay. And I would say right now, this is the area in the game that I think needs the most work. Keep in mind, I am not insane at any tac shooter. Some of this might just come down to personal preference. Usually I'm sitting between gold and diamond in games, so I'm very average, and I also only played 3 hours of this in total. What I wasn't a fan of in the gunplay though, is that body shots felt like they meant nothing. It constantly felt like you needed to hose people down to get body shot kills. Don't get me wrong, I am all for headshots in games, allowing for one taps or close to that depending on the weapon you're using and the range you're fighting at, but mainly because it works for the current games like Valorant and CS. You can dominate if you land that first shot, but if you miss, you're then going to get penalized for it if you can't recoil control. In Spectre, because you have full accuracy while ADS and even while moving, it felt like you could just spam and get lucky kills with your gun when it eventually connected with somebody's head. It reminded me a lot of losing fights in Rainbow Six, where just because somebody randomly got a headshot, even though their aim was all over the place, they won the gunfight because I chose to go for a safer, more controlled kill with body shots. Just to kind of prove my point, with armor in Spectre, you have 150 health. The Blackout, which is the equivalent of an M4 or a Phantom in Valorant, deals 35 body shot damage. This requires a minimum of 5 body shots to kill at close range. The Phantom deals 39 body shot damage in Valorant, so that's going to be 4 shots for 150 health, and I believe both M4 variants in CS are also going to be able to 4-shot body shot at close range. So overall, it feels kind of like similar weapons across genres are dealing less body shot damage in Spectre. On top of that, sometimes weapon recoil felt a little bit strange to me. It felt like there was a lot more left to right recoil than upwards. Also, certain weapons like LMGs were just absolute laser beams. It didn't really resonate with me that the weapons felt like they belonged in a tactical shooter, nor like I was really playing a tac shooter. Snipers in this game also felt a little bit off. To my knowledge, these are the only weapon in the game that even while ADS, you still need to be standing still for full accuracy. I get that snipers would be pretty OP if you could move and shoot, but needing to stand still just artificially kind of puts these weapons down a tier than the rest. Then finally, wallbangs are also something that Mountaintop has really leaned heavily into in this game. I love wallbangs, but as it stands, it was really hard to tell for what allowed for good bullet penetration versus what didn't. There were certain walls that looked like they were solid metal and I would die behind them, and then others looked like they were plywood and I couldn't deal any damage through them. Not a huge issue. Understanding this will come with time in different maps, but it could confuse new players and annoy other players when new maps are introduced. A 7 out of 10 is what I'd give the gunplay in its current state. It is completely passable, especially for a full release for a game. These are just tiny things I would like to see changed to make it feel more like a tac shooter, at least in my eyes. Moving along, sponsors are kind of the third most important thing in the game. This is where you're getting all of your utility, and I love this system. The best way to think of it is like Valorant agents, but you don't get an ultimate ability. The first ability is always going to be free each round. Then after that, you have 2 abilities which can be purchased each round, sometimes with multiple charges. None of the abilities, at least in my eyes, seemed super overpowered. There were some that were stronger than others for sure, but nothing was a must-have or a must-run. A bunch of abilities had multiple ways they could also be used and also offered some additional benefits, which should offer a pretty high skill ceiling. One of the main reasons I stopped playing Valorant was because I wasn't a fan of the agent system. I didn't like going into games and feeling like I lost because of my team comp. I also didn't like losing individual fights to something like Arena that just felt like they were overpowered because they're always full health and they have a faster fire rate if they're in their ultimate. Mountaintop, on the other hand, with a game like Spectre, seems that they have the philosophy of keeping these things really, really balanced, and not having ultimate abilities helps a ton in my opinion. There isn't much more to talk about, so at this point, I'm just going to sprint through all the 8 sponsors that they currently have in the game. Feel free to pause and read more yourself if you want to. First up, we have Pinnacle International. You get a Splinter Grenade, you have an Adrenalink, which is a heal over time item, and a Flashbang. With Morgan United, you have Smoke Shift, which is just your typical smoke, Meltdown, which is a molly, and Hidden Grasp, which is a slow trap. Bloom Technologies has Hex Barrier, which is a barrier that blocks damage, Twin Mend that heals you and your Spectre or an ally and their Spectre, and then Swarm Grenade, which blocks vision and deals damage over time. Riker Industries has Wave Scan. This is like a Sova Dart. It has Whole Mine, which is a proximity mine, and then Arc Sentry, which is a slowing sentry. Vector Dynamics has Dual Amp, which is a 15% fire rate buff AoE you can put down. Vector Wall, that is a wall that blocks vision and moves with you, and then Nanosphere, which is a bouncing AoE molly. Ghost Link gives you Partition, which is a wall that blocks line of sight, Dupe, which is a clone that pings enemies if it gets shot, and Distortion Field that blurs enemies' visions. Moo Robotics comes with Patches, which is a healing drone for your team. It has Dazzler, which is a flying crosshair following flash, almost like a Skybird, and then Hyperdome, which is a fast recall and defensive bubble. Then lastly, there is Umbra Reconnaissance, where you get Recon Wing, which is a throwable reveal item to show enemies through walls, Pulse Finder, which is like a heartbeat sensor type item that can mark players, and then Glare Burst, which is a slow charging blind. Overall, I think the sponsors are great. I love seeing some overlap with different blinds and different mollies. I would love to see some more smoke options. There are a good amount of walls though, and it does leave a ton of room for sponsors to be added over time. I would give this system an 8 out of 10 overall. I think it's much better than a system like Valorant's, and I think it has potential to be really, really good as long as they keep adding things that are balanced over time. Maps are also super important in tactical shooters, and right now Spectre Divide has 3 maps. Mill, which takes place in an abandoned research facility, Skyway, which is more or less just a shipping yard, and then also Metro, which is a train station that's kind of been overtaken by desert sands. I will say they definitely achieved a very different feeling for all 3 of the maps, which I think is great. Mill has a bunch of catwalks and elevated ventilation systems, so by throwing your puck up there and switching Spectres, you gain access to high ground. Skyway feels like the largest map, and I think that Mountaintop designed this one to allow players to move their Spectres around quicker with what they're calling fast recall zones. And then finally, Metro is much more of a compact map with tighter angles forcing closer fights on one half of the map, and the other half is primarily long range fights. I don't think I've had enough time to judge each map and really nitpick what is good and bad. One general thing that I did notice, however, is there wasn't as much mid play on maps as I would have liked. Mid was almost always left open with nobody in it, which made it really feel kind of like a no man's land type area. And considering that Duality is also the main aspect of the game, I'd really like to see a lot more features in all the maps that are only accessible via the use of switching Spectres. A bunch of cubbies could be added for Spectres to be lurking in that you have to clear, more catwalks in general, things like that. As of right now, I think the maps are pretty mid. Not to say that they're bad, they're just nothing special or really unique. As of right now, I'd rank it a 7 out of 10. The buy menus and the weapons of this game is another thing that I wanted to talk about. They are super important because they're a staple in tactical shooters. And in Spectre Divide, I'm just not really a fan, at least of their buy system. They've done something completely unique, and it makes perfect sense with Duality being in the game, which is that you always buy weapons in pairs. On screen now is the full buy menu, and you can see 5 different tiers of weapon combos, where each tier is just roughly representing the price point. When purchasing a pair of weapons, one Spectre gets the first weapon and the second Spectre gets the second weapon. Who gets which weapon doesn't really matter because you can easily switch these around, but at the very top of the tier, it shows you the weapon that you get with every single combo. So one weapon you're always going to get, and then the second weapon is going to depend on the option that you pick in that tier. So in tier 3, for example, I will be getting the Cyclone AR, no matter which one I pick, and then I can either choose the auto shotgun, the machine gun, or the semi-auto AR, depending on my choices. It makes sense and really fits the theme of the game, but overall, I think it just kind of makes the game a bit worse off. All it does is really remove the ability to fully play the way you want. In my opinion, one of 2 systems would be much better, at least for this game, to give more control into the player's hands. First off, if Mountaintop wanted to stick with the weapon pair system, which I get, they should just allow players to create their own combos that they can buy in game. If I wanted to buy 2 prototype op snipers and have that on each Spectre, let me do that, just make the price reflect it. Very similar to how you can control what weapons you have in CS with your T-sided and CT-sided choices. Second, and what I think would be the better method, is just make a standard buy menu where you can get one weapon at a time. For example, I could left click to put it on my first Spectre and then right click a different weapon, or even the same weapon to put it on my second Spectre. To me, it would make much more sense to do this and allow players to play the game closer to how they wanted to. It would also make for more interesting eco rounds, since one Spectre could be fully kitted with weapons, while the other one has absolutely nothing. The other important things to note is that if you do buy a weapon combo and one Spectre dies, you can buy that combo again next round and only have to pay for the weapon you're missing. That works great for the current system, and I absolutely love that feature. Just like in Valorant and CS, you can also request for weapons and buy weapons for other people. You can even throw weapons into the team inventory if you no longer want them. As much as I'd love to see them make these changes that I went over, I do think the system works perfectly fine for now and for a full release of the game. Overall, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. I do think those changes would help a lot, but it works. Other than everything I've covered so far, the last thing I think people are really going to care about are Spectre cosmetics, weapon skins, and crews inside of Spectre Divide as well. Just like most games, there is a store that has cosmetics for sale. These can be purchased with the in-game currency called SP. In the playtest, everything just cost 1 SP, so I'd imagine come the full launch, these prices are going to be very similar to Valorant. In the store, there are bundles, singular weapon skins, and then there's also Spectre cosmetic items and sets. So you can fully customize everything you're using. You can mix and match Spectre skins to look exactly how you want, on top of being able to change other Spectre presets like your hair and face markings. The weapons do also have effects similar to Valorant skins, so as you upgrade them, you can customize the firing effect, weapon VFX, celebrations, and even the colorway. There were no knives to purchase in the shop at the time we were playing, but I'd imagine those will also be available because that is like printing money for games nowadays. Then lastly, Spectre Divide also has something called crews. Crews are described as in-game social systems, allowing players to compete for weekly and seasonal rewards. It seems like the main goal with crews, though, is just to compete against other crews to make a name for yourself. You can have up to 60 players in your crew, and each person can contribute to an overall goal. There are leaderboards, which seem to update each week, so I'm assuming that they are global. Not entirely sure how the system is going to play out, but I've always liked the idea of making a name for yourself and others in games by being part of a group. That is everything I can think to cover when it comes to Spectre Divide. At this point, you guys know just as much as I do. I had an amazing time playing the game. As it sits currently, I think the game is like an 8.5 out of 10 overall. Even though I would love to see some slight changes, which I mentioned, the main reason you're going to be playing this game is for Duality. It's for controlling 2 players at once and using that to outplay people, and it works perfectly. Most of the things I mentioned being negative were more so in my opinion and how I'd like the game to come out, and changes that I do think would improve it for the bulk player base, but they are not needed for it to be a success. If the game was released today, it would be better than like 99% of games that come out. It's abundantly clear that the devs working on this actually are thinking things through and have focused on making the most important systems in the game work really well. If you guys are interested, I believe there's going to be more and public playtests for you to get your hands on the game before it actually goes live, and the game should also be available on Steam. I don't know, as of filming this video, if the Steam page is up yet. It hasn't been officially announced, so if there is a Steam page, I will link it down below for you guys to wishlist and check out over there. Lastly, if you guys are interested in just seeing some full gameplay to get a better understanding of how the game plays, I will link my full playtest as an unlisted video down below for you guys to skim through, watch any of the matches, and then listen to our conversations and questions. Ask me any questions down below in the comments that you have when it comes to Spectre Divide. I'll try my best to answer them. Once again, a huge thank you to Mountaintop Studios for having me. Definitely looking forward to the full release.